Hi there. I'm Maurice. My mother dragged me into court, told the judge I was unstable, then shaved my head behind closed doors, like I was something dirty to clean. But what shattered me more wasn't the haircut. It was realizing she planned it all. The lies, the file, even stealing the charity I built. And just when I thought I'd lost everything, my fiancé walked in. As the judge, you ever wonder how far a mother will go to erase her own daughter? I found the envelope at 6:32 in the morning, shoved halfway under my door, like it couldn't be bothered to be delivered with dignity. The seal was clean, but the contents were not. It was a court summons. My own mother had filed an emergency custody motion to remove my niece from my care. She said I was mentally unstable. The words didn't even sting at first. They echoed. The hallway of my apartment, usually filled with early sunlight and the hum of my coffee pot, felt colder, narrower. I clutched the envelope tighter, like squeezing it would make it vanish. It didn't. I raised Darla like my own after Delaney died. 3 years, 3 birthdays, dozens of nightmares soothed, hundreds of school lunches packed, and not once did Celeste, my mother, step in to help. Until now. Until she wanted the title of caregiver without the weight of it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I called my lawyer. "Langston," I said, voice even but brittle. "My mother's trying to take my niece from me." He was quiet for a second, then sighed. "Charleston Family Courthouse. Today, noon. Bring everything." I brought everything. Folders, emails, report cards. Even the unicorn drawing Darla made of me with the words, "My real mom," scribbled underneath. I dressed like I was going to war. Blazer, heels, hair pinned with surgical precision. But when I reached the front steps of the courthouse, I felt like a child who'd shown up to a party she wasn't invited to. The clerk at the front table didn't look up when I gave my name. "Maurice Keene," I said, sliding my ID forward. She rifled through the pile beside her and handed me a badge. I clipped it onto my jacket without looking, too focused on the whispers trailing through the lobby. But when I glanced down, the words hit me like a slap. Nuisance. Not a typo. Not a mistake. That badge was printed with intent. "I think there's been an error," I said quietly. "My last name's Keene." She shrugged. "That's what the list says." Before I could press further, I heard the familiar click of a phone camera. I turned, and there she was. Celeste. Perfect posture, pearls, pale blue scarf. She raised her phone slowly, as if posing for a victory photo, and snapped a shot of my badge. Then she smiled, tight-lipped and satisfied. "Nice to see you finally wearing your role," she called across the atrium, just loud enough to humiliate, just quiet enough to feign innocence. People turned. A few coughed. A man in a navy suit whispered something to the woman beside him, who glanced at me, then looked away like I was contagious. I didn't move. I didn't return the smile. I smoothed the badge down with trembling fingers and walked toward the courtroom, heels echoing on the marble like a metronome counting down to something ugly. Inside, the air was thick, cool but stifling. I scanned the gallery and saw them. My family. Or what used to be. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years, now gathered like it was a wedding or a funeral, and I was the spectacle. None of them looked at me. Not directly. Celeste sat in the front row like she was waiting for a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Her legs were crossed, hands folded, face serene. Behind her, a whisper of perfume and judgment. The only seat left was in the back, near the side door. I sat down slowly, adjusting my skirt, my folder, the badge I wanted to rip off and burn. The clerk called my name. I stood. "Emergency custody hearing for the minor, Darla Keene," he announced. "Filed by the maternal grandmother, Celeste Drayton." Her lawyer stood, smooth as a sermon. "Your Honor, my client wishes only to ensure the child's safety. Miss Keene has a history of emotional volatility, documented, concerning, and untreated." My jaw tensed. Not because I was shocked, because I wasn't. This wasn't about Darla. It was never about Darla. This was Celeste reclaiming control in the only language she spoke, humiliation dressed up as protection. She didn't stand, she didn't speak, she didn't need to. The room did the speaking for her. I looked straight ahead, not blinking. I remembered the times I excused her cruelty as concern, when I told myself her coldness was just generational, when I justified her absences, her corrections, her criticisms, all those silences I allowed in the name of peace. But this wasn't peacekeeping, this was war. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't going to let her win by pretending it wasn't. I gripped the edge of the folder on my lap. It shook. My hands didn't. The judge glanced down at the documents, then up at me. "Miss Keene, are you prepared to respond to these claims?" I opened my mouth. But before I could speak, the door beside the witness prep room creaked open. Celeste turned her head slowly. A signal, a smirk. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispered something. I caught one word. "Ready?" The courtroom faded behind me as the bailiff gestured for me to step into the witness room. My heels clicked once, then twice, then... The door to the witness preparation room clicked behind me, and the last thing I saw before the lights dimmed was the pair of silver clippers in my mother's hand. The bailiff nodded once, then motioned toward the door. I stood, folder clutched against my chest, and followed without a word. The room they led me into wasn't large. A narrow, windowless box with pale yellow walls and a cheap table pushed into the corner. The fluorescent lights above hummed like a warning. It wasn't a place for preparation. It was an ambush. Celeste was already there, standing calmly by the table, like she'd arrived early to set the stage. Her smile didn't match the coldness in her eyes. Two women stood behind her. Neither introduced themselves, but one wore a security badge, and the other carried a clipboard like it was a shield. "This is where we do the cleansing," Celeste said, her voice soft, almost reverent. "I didn't ask for any," I started. "It's necessary," she interrupted. "You don't walk into the Lord's house carrying the weight of your chaos. This is part of the sanctification." I blinked. "We're not in church. We're in a courthouse." She ignored me. Her fingers reached into her purse and pulled out a pair of electric clippers. Silver, gleaming, humming with purpose. I took one step back. "Don't," I said. "Don't you dare." Celeste tilted her head. "You always were stubborn." The woman with the badge moved behind me. Before I could spin away, she gripped my right arm. The other woman stepped in, blocking the door. "Let me go," I snapped. But it was already too late. The sound of the clippers buzzed to life, loud and jagged. The first pass tore through the side of my head, close and cruel. Hair fell in uneven chunks to the linoleum. My scalp burned where the blade snagged. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I froze. Not because I was scared, but because I understood, in that moment, just how far she was willing to go. "You see?" Celeste whispered near my ear. "I told the judge you were unstable. Now you'll look it." My mouth opened, then shut. There was no logic to counter, no room for reason, only this. Raw, calculated violence masked as ritual. The kind of abuse that comes dressed as love and smells like lavender. My arms were finally released. The clippers were turned off. The silence afterward was thicker than the air. I stepped toward the mirror on the wall, a cheap rectangle bolted to the drywall with rusting screws. My reflection barely looked back. Half my head was bare, pink scalp showing in angry patches. Mascara had smeared down one cheek. My blouse, the one Darla had ironed for me that morning, was wrinkled at the shoulder where I'd been held down. The woman with the clipboard cleared her throat and slipped out without a word. I stared at myself, not blinking, then raised my hand and struck the mirror. It cracked straight down the center. Not enough to shatter. Not enough to break. Just enough to remind me I was still here. I turned back to Celeste. "You just made your final mistake, Mother," I said. I didn't yell it. I didn't need to. The words dropped like a blade on polished stone. She didn't respond, but I saw her jaw tighten. Minutes passed, Or maybe only seconds. When I stepped back into the courtroom, I didn't bother fixing the scarf properly. It was slung loosely around my neck, barely covering the damage. I walked past the gallery, past the rows of curious eyes, ignoring the stares and murmurs. Someone let out a quick laugh, high-pitched, and then immediately swallowed in silence. I didn't flinch. Celeste sat with her legs crossed, hands folded, looking like the queen of her own delusion. I walked slowly, deliberately, to my seat. I sat. And then, with fingers that no longer trembled, I pulled the scarf off and laid it across my lap. Silence spread through the courtroom like a virus. The judge glanced over, his eyes flicking to my head, and then quickly back to the file in front of him. He said nothing, no one did. I sat there, exposed, yes, but not defeated. Let them see. Let them witness what control looks like when stripped bare. And then something inside me shifted. A realization so sharp it nearly made me laugh. When someone disappears long enough, you start inventing reasons why, so it won't hurt. You make up illnesses, grief, spiritual awakenings. Anything to explain why your mother doesn't protect you, doesn't see you, doesn't love you. But this wasn't absence. This was a choice, a legacy of cruelty disguised as tradition. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to carry that legacy quietly. As the judge called a recess and the murmurs began to pick up again, I sat taller. And in the hush before the gavel hit the desk, I felt it, the moment I stopped needing her love to prove I existed. The judge's voice faded into background noise as papers shuffled and attorneys repositioned themselves for the next hearing motion. I was still in my chair, still upright, still breathing, but not fully present. My scalp tingled under the scarf. Sweat had dried along my spine. I could taste something metallic in my mouth, maybe defiance. Celeste's lawyer stood and filed a motion to suppress 3 character witnesses, people who had known me for years. They claimed the witnesses were unreliable due to emotional closeness. My hands went still over my lap, fingertips brushing against the hem of the scarf. I blinked once, twice. Then the courtroom carpet caught my eye. Thick burgundy wool, a deep muted red that looked almost black in the corners. It was the same kind of carpet that used to line the upstairs hallway in our old house on Sweetwater Lane. Outside my childhood room. That hallway had been quiet for years. But suddenly, in that moment, it roared back. It was February. I was 17. I'd come home a day early from my school retreat, a canceled bus route, bad weather, and a stomach bug that wouldn't quit. My phone battery had died somewhere between the field station and Charleston, but I figured it wouldn't matter. Home was less than 2 hours away. By the time I reached the house, the wind had picked up. I remember wiping sleet off my coat with one hand and fumbling with my key in the other, except the key didn't fit. The locks had been changed. I knocked. No answer. I rang the bell. Nothing. At first, I thought maybe they were out. But then the porch light flicked on, and the curtains in Celeste's bedroom rustled. I saw her silhouette. Standing perfectly still, I waved both arms, called out. She didn't move. For a while, I tried to convince myself she couldn't hear me over the wind. But as the cold set in and the ache in my legs started pulsing, I stopped making excuses. I sat on the porch swing, wrapping my arms tight around myself. The air stung through the holes in my jeans. My teeth wouldn't stop chattering. At some point, I started crying. Not loud, just small gasps that felt too close to begging. Eventually, the neighbor across the street, Mr. Gaines, came out with a flashlight and walked over. "Murray? Honey, what are you doing out here like this?" I can't get in." His eyes darted up toward the lit window, then back to me. He didn't ask more. He brought me inside, wrapped me in a throw blanket, and called the non-emergency police line. The officer who arrived knocked for 15 minutes before Celeste answered the door. "She's being dramatic," she said. "She's always been that way. She just wants attention." I stood behind the officer and said nothing. That was the last time I ever called that house my home. The carpet under my feet snapped me back into the courtroom like a trapdoor opening. I blinked hard and looked around. The murmur of voices continued. But now, I saw it differently. The cruelty Celeste practiced today wasn't new. It wasn't invented for this courtroom. It had always been there, just in quieter forms. Unlocked doors, withheld affection, smiles that came with strings. Her motions weren't legal tactics. They were extensions of something older, darker. This hearing wasn't just about custody anymore. It was about control, about rewriting history while I was still alive to remember it. I leaned toward Langston, my fiancé, no, my partner in every sense, and tore a page from my legal pad. Start compiling prior restraint cases. I'll testify. He didn't look at me, just nodded once and opened his laptop. I wasn't just fighting for temporary guardianship. I was fighting to exist in the narrative of my own life. Celeste had tried to erase me with bad paperwork, unspoken threats, and half-truths soaked in righteousness. But I'd lived through her kind of silence before. I knew its shape. I could see the outline of it in every lie she told. I adjusted my scarf, stood up, and walked to the clerk's desk. "I'd like to submit my witness request," I said calmly. The Kielclerk gave me a look, then passed me a form. I filled out my name, my birth date, the reason for testimony, direct response to character suppression, truth. I signed my name at the bottom, and I knew, in that moment, what story I had to tell. Mine. The bailiff called us back in from recess, and I stepped into the courtroom just as the late afternoon sun began to throw long shadows through the high windows. I'd barely returned to my seat when Celeste's attorney stood up and asked to present a new exhibit. "Exhibit 14B, he announced, a psychiatric file documenting a formal evaluation of Ms. Murray Keene, dated March 2012. There was a pause, not from the judge, not from me, but from the room itself. A sort of stillness, like everyone instinctively knew something wasn't right. My fingers curled inward. The folder he handed to the judge was sealed in plastic, stamped with a hospital logo I vaguely recognized, Palmetto Behavioral. The attorney explained that the file detailed my emotional instability, paranoia, and dissociative episodes during my late 20s. Supposedly, I had been under evaluation for spiritual delusions. It took less than 5 seconds for me to realize it wasn't real, and 10 seconds more to realize how dangerous that was. I leaned forward. "Your Honor, I'd like to formally contest the validity of that document." Celeste didn't even look at me. She sat there, arms folded gently across her stomach, lips pursed like she was holding back a prayer. Or a laugh. The judge looked up. "On what basis, Ms. Keene?" I stood. "First, the hospital letterhead includes a logo that was discontinued in 2009. This report is dated 2012. A murmur stirred the gallery. "Second, the file's attending psychiatrist, Dr. Ellen Caulfield, hasn't held a license in South Carolina since 2005. Her name appears here, but the signature doesn't match any of her public records." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Third," I continued, "this file was never submitted to me during discovery. If it existed, I would have had the legal right to review it." Celeste's lawyer calmly responded, "It's part of a faith-based treatment history, not traditional clinical documentation." He then added, almost proudly, "It's a spiritual diagnosis, a religious wellness assessment." There it was. The new angle. Celeste wasn't just painting me as mentally unstable. She was spiritualizing it, wrapping it in righteousness. "She claimed to be hearing things," he continued. "We now believe those were voices of judgment, rooted in sin. The diagnosis was meant to cleanse that energy." My jaw clenched so tightly, I thought I might chip a molar. "Your Honor," I said, "there's a difference between faith and fraud, and what you're looking at is not healing, it's a weapon." The judge held the folder, flipping slowly through the pages, his brow tense. Celeste smiled. Not a wide smile, just enough. I turned my gaze toward her and stared until she looked away. The judge excused us for a brief recess. As soon as I stepped into the hall, Langston was already on the phone, pacing near the vending machines. I caught his eye and walked over. "They forged it," I said. He nodded. "I figured. The signature's off. She's trying to rewrite me, Lang, in paper, in memory." He stopped pacing. "We'll find everything we need," he said. "If she built this on lies, we'll burn it with the truth." I nodded, then turned to walk the length of the hall. I needed air, but not outside. Just something not soaked in courtroom perfume and performance. That's when I heard soft footsteps behind me. "Ms. Keene?" I turned. A young woman, couldn't be older than 20, stood holding a binder tight against her chest. She wore a staff badge, Amira G. Intern. I know I'm not supposed to say anything," she whispered, looking down the hallway to make sure no one heard her. "But I saw your mom. She was in the copy room yesterday. She had a different file. She tore pages out, stamped them. Then she called someone and said, 'Now it matches the timeline.'" My breath caught. Amira looked panicked, like she had already said too much. "Thank you," I said gently. "It's not proof," she murmured. "But sometimes the truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be present." And she turned and walked quickly back down the corridor before I could ask anything more. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle into my bones. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to remind me I wasn't crazy. Enough to confirm that Celeste wasn't just cruel. She was calculated. And when I returned to the courtroom, scarf tied tighter now, I knew this wouldn't end in words. It would end in evidence. I stepped back into the courtroom just as the lights dimmed slightly to accommodate a projector being wheeled in. A low, mechanical hum buzzed in the background. Celeste's attorney stood with theatrical ease and gestured toward the setup as if unveiling a priceless painting. "Your Honor," he said, "we'd like to present Exhibit 18B, a character demonstration relevant to the court's understanding of Ms. Keene's mental stability." He didn't look at me. That was the most dangerous part. How calm they were when they aimed to destroy you. The screen lit up, slightly tilted, catching dust particles in the light. Then it began. It was a video, grainy but unmistakable. Me, 7 years younger, in my apartment, pacing, red-eyed, my voice breaking. I was in the middle of what they wanted the world to believe was a meltdown. It was taken without my consent. The narration cut in, flat and cold. This is who she really is. I didn't remember the camera, but I remembered the moment. That night, my landlord had illegally entered my apartment while I was home. I'd called Celeste in panic. She told me I was being dramatic and hung up. In the courtroom, no one knew that. Gasps flickered through the room like little sparks catching dry wood. A woman near the back muttered, "That's just sad." I stood slowly. I didn't raise my voice. "Context isn't optional," I said. The judge looked at me. "You'll have your turn, Ms. Keene." Celeste's lawyer wasn't finished. "We have a licensed therapist who has reviewed Ms. Keene's case history." Langston leaned forward slightly in his seat. The therapist entered. Polished shoes, well-practiced smile. Claimed to have followed my case for years through publicly available sources and clinical patterns consistent with paranoid dissociation. I requested his credentials to be entered into the record. The judge allowed it. Langston slipped me a folder under the table. Crisp copies from the South Carolina Licensing Board. Revoked license. Not a therapist since 2019. Never authorized to provide expert testimony in a family court. I stood again. "Your Honor, this is character assassination disguised as psychological concern." The room quieted. "His license was revoked 5 years ago. He was never my therapist. He's never met me. This isn't a professional opinion. It's slander wrapped in academic vocabulary." The judge leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing at the so-called therapist. "I have documentation if the court would like to verify," I added, holding up the packet. Celeste didn't flinch. She looked down at her hands, as if this part had always been a contingency, not the plan. Her attorney's smile flickered, then dropped. After a tense pause, the judge finally said, "We'll recess for 10 minutes." Outside in the hallway, I pressed my back to the brick column near the bench and tried to slow my breathing. The courtroom's cold followed me, clinging to my neck like fog. A child pointed at me as he passed with his mother. "That's her," he said. "That's the crazy lady from the video." His mother hushed him sharply and pulled him away. I didn't react. I just took out my phone and typed a message to Langston. "We go for the trust fund next. No delays." I stared at the screen for a second longer before locking it. Inside the courtroom again, Celeste took the stand. She looked like grief and grace rolled into a pressed blouse. Her voice, soft, measured. "I only ever tried to help my daughter," she said, palms gently open. "But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes we must intervene when someone we care about can't see they need help." There were nods. A sniffle or two. I said nothing, until she added, "She once told me she wished she hadn't been born." I stood. "That was after you told me I was a mistake." The oxygen seemed to leave the room. Even the court reporter's hands hovered above her keys. Celeste blinked, once. Her expression didn't change, but the power behind her words cracked like old paint in heat. And in that moment, the trial shifted. Not legally, not officially, but the room, the jury, the judge, the people watching, they started to see. They tried to shatter me in front of everyone. But I came back with the truth, and next time, I'll come with receipts. The court came back from recess with less energy and more edge. People didn't lean back in their chairs the same way. A shift had happened, the kind of subtle pivot that turns a courtroom from a stage into a battleground. Langston entered through the main aisle, not rushed, not showy, but precise. He carried a leather-bound folder tucked under one arm, and his badge from the South Carolina bar clipped at his belt, gleaming just enough to be noticed. The moment he sat beside me, he leaned in close. "I've got the trust fund records," he murmured. It felt like my lungs could finally expand again. When the judge called us back into session, Langston stood first. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'd like to introduce a new exhibit. Documents recovered this morning showing the reallocation of assets from the Maurice Keene Academic Trust." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Langston handed 3 stapled forms to the bailiff, who brought them to the bench. My name was right there on the first page. Black ink, clean lines, a date from 6 years ago. It was a transfer notice, a legal redirection of the entire fund, nearly $240,000, from an account bearing my signature into an LLC registered under the name Daughters of Grace Ministries. In Cursor, Celeste's name was listed as the sole managing director. I stood. I didn't wait for approval. My mother didn't just rewrite my reputation. She rewrote my ownership, I said, voice steady. A hush fell across the room. Celeste sat motionless, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the witness stand, like it could somehow turn this all around. "I created that fund," I continued. "Every application, every donor, every scholarship recipient, I vetted personally, and then one day it was gone. No announcement, no explanation, just gone." The judge skimmed through the documents, frowning slightly. Langston added, "We've also found filings from the IRS showing that Ms. Drayton claimed full tax-deductible credits under her ministry for the donations attached to the trust." A collective inhale swept the room like someone had opened a window in winter. "And it doesn't stop there," I said, stepping closer to the monitor placed beside the court's lectern. "Last October, there was a gala, held to honor the founder of the scholarship program. I wasn't invited." I tapped the keyboard. A photo appeared on screen. Celeste, dressed in navy and pearls, holding a crystal plaque. Her smile was wide. The engraving read, "Celeste Drayton, founder and visionary of the Keene Opportunity Fund." The same fund I'd named after Dad. The same one I'd built after his death. "I wasn't omitted," I said. "I was erased." Murmurs turned into whispers, and whispers into quiet outrage. The judge finally spoke. "Ms. Drayton, do you wish to respond?" Celeste rose slowly. Her blouse was pristine, her posture perfect, but her voice cracked, barely. "You didn't know how to handle responsibility," she said. "I protected the fund from your instability." There was no heat behind her words, just strategy, calculated cold. I didn't yell, I didn't shake. "You didn't protect me," I replied, my gaze locked on hers. "You protected the image of yourself you wanted the world to buy." There was no gasp this time, just stillness, the kind that signals tectonic plates moving under everyone's feet. The judge called for a recess. In the hallway, I waited. When Celeste finally emerged from the ladies' room, her eyes widened at the sight of me. I didn't move. We stood inches apart. "You keep rewriting the story," I said calmly. "You keep changing records, replacing names, staging truth. One more stunt like that, and I won't just fight you in court. I'll dismantle the foundation you built for my life." She blinked, slowly. And for the first time, I saw it. Not confusion, not defiance. Fear. I gave her the final out, and she looked me dead in the eye and stepped further in. Langston was already waiting for me when I returned to his office that evening. I could tell something was different by the way he didn't even look up when I opened the door. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen, posture rigid. He didn't speak right away. On the desk in front of him was a white envelope, unmarked, uncreased, no return address. "I found it when I came back from court," he said flatly, pushing the contents toward me. Inside was a flash drive. We exchanged no words, just a look. I nodded. He plugged it into the laptop, and the screen blinked before revealing grainy but unmistakable footage. A narrow hallway, then a door opening into the courthouse's witness prep room. The timestamp was from the morning of the hearing. There I was, sitting. Two women flanked me. Celeste entered the frame a moment later, pulling gloves onto her hands. The camera angle shifted slightly, likely a body cam or concealed security cam on the ceiling corner, but it caught enough. The buzzing started. My head jerked. I mouthed, "Please stop." One woman tightened her grip on my wrist. Celeste leaned in with slow, deliberate strokes. I stopped breathing. Langston didn't say a word, but his hands were fists. "I'll submit it for sealed review tonight," he said. I nodded. "Make sure it's admissible by morning." The next day, the courtroom was filled beyond capacity. Folding chairs had been dragged from adjoining rooms. People stood along the back walls. Even the bailiff seemed unsettled by the tension in the air. The judge's face was drawn, exhausted, but firm. "We've received an anonymous video submission relevant to the events in question," he began. "Given its content, I'm allowing it to be played in open court." The lights dimmed. The screen flickered. And there it was. Again. The clip. The sound of the clippers filled the room, sharp and unforgiving. My voice, strained, cracking, pleading. The hands restraining me. Celeste's calm, measured motions. Her whisper, "This is necessary. She's unclean." A gasp echoed from the back row. A woman near the jury box began crying. Celeste's lawyer jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, we object to—" "Sit down," the judge said curtly. I sat still, didn't blink, didn't cry. I whispered just loud enough for the clerk to hear. "I warned her." When the lights came back on, no one moved. The judge turned toward Celeste. "Do you wish to address this?" Celeste stood slowly, placing both hands on the podium. Her voice was sharp, polished and confident, but a tremor slipped through. "That video has been manipulated," she said. "Anyone could be in that room. That is not me." Her words landed like broken glass. "And frankly," she added louder now, "that woman isn't even my daughter." I froze. Gasps now turned to murmurs. Heads turned toward me. "My daughter is Darla. She's the one who stayed close, who never caused scenes. This one, she changed. I don't know who she is anymore." I couldn't feel my fingers, couldn't move. The courtroom fell completely silent. It wasn't the denial that did it. It was the abandonment. The final, public, irreversible exile. I stood slowly, straight-backed. I didn't glance at the jury, or the press, or the people clutching their pearls in the gallery. I just walked. Out of the courtroom, through the metal detector, down the hallway, into the service exit at the rear of the courthouse. Outside, the wind was harsh. My scarf flapped behind me. I collapsed near the old delivery entrance, knees pulled to my chest. I didn't sob. I just folded into myself, breathing in the scent of brick and exhaust and grief. A moment later, I felt a presence. A court officer in gray slacks and a plain vest knelt down and placed something beside me. A folded napkin from the cafeteria. Inside was a handwritten note. "You're not invisible, just hidden from the wrong eyes too long." I read it 3 times before folding it again. And then, quietly, I stood. They saw the tape. They heard her words. Now it was time they read the truth. The night before the final hearing, I barely slept. I sat cross-legged on the living room rug, surrounded by old photos, legal pads, and a cup of coffee gone cold. Outside, the streetlights hummed. Inside, the only sound was the occasional shuffle of Langston's steps in the next room. When he finally emerged, he held a yellowed folder with the edges curled from time and heat. His expression wasn't triumphant. It was quiet, like a man walking into a war he knew had already cost too much. "The affidavit," he said, placing it gently in front of me. "Your grandfather left it with his estate attorney. He wanted it to be used only if things got this bad." I opened it with steady fingers. The page inside was typed, but the final lines were handwritten, shaky but clear. My throat tightened. At sunrise, we left for the courthouse. By the time we arrived, the building buzzed with tension. Reporters hovered just beyond the rope lines. One called out my name. I didn't stop walking. Inside, security had doubled. The judge looked more worn than ever, but still carried the gravity of a man who'd seen families burned down by silence. "Mr. Langston," the judge nodded. "You may proceed." Langston stood, voice steady. "Your Honor, we submit into evidence a notarized affidavit from Bernard Drayton, dated 13 months before his passing." A murmur moved through the gallery. Langston continued. "The affidavit affirms that Ms. Maurice Keene conceived, developed, and structured the Drayton Educational Trust. That her mother, Celeste Drayton, was listed solely for donor credibility. That the intention was never for Ms. Keene to be removed from ownership or recognition." He paused, then read aloud. "I regret denying my granddaughter her rightful place. I fear I won't live to correct it. Please ensure she receives what was always hers, by heart and by hand." Celeste didn't react immediately. Then she scoffed, loudly. Of course he said that. The man was losing his grip on reality. He thought the houseplants were singing. No one laughed. Langston waited. Then, without flinching, held up another envelope. "Additionally," he said, "we submit a second document, executed and sealed by the original Board of Trustees." He passed it to the clerk. "This agreement names me, Langston Duval, as legal proxy for Ms. Keene in all Foundation decisions, should her capacity be brought into question." The judge's eyebrows lifted. "And has that clause been triggered?" Langston nodded. "It has. By Ms. Drayton's repeated claims of mental instability, which, according to the clause, grants me authority to restore original charter rights and redirect fund control." You could have heard a pin drop. Celeste went pale. "Your Honor," Langston added, "we've also compiled a list of shell entities created in the last 4 years, all traced back to accounts in Miss Drayton's and Darla Drayton's names. These accounts withdrew from the fund under misleading pretenses." He laid the documents down one by one, like a surgeon revealing each tumor. The judge didn't blink. "This will be forwarded to the DOJ for independent review." Celeste stood, voice trembling. "You don't understand. That girl, she broke me. She left me to deal with everything. I was protecting the legacy." The judge shook his head. "No, Ms. Drayton, This isn't protection. It's erasure, and you've weaponized it. Celeste slumped back into her seat. The room spun with whispers. But I didn't speak. Not then. I reached for a legal pad, tore off a single sheet, and wrote, "Legacy is not what you steal. It's what you leave unbroken." I folded it and handed it to the bailiff, who placed it on the judge's desk. He read it in silence, then set it down with a nod. Celeste didn't leave the courthouse in handcuffs. She left in something worse: disgrace. She didn't glance back. No one followed her. I remained seated as the room emptied. Jurors filed out. Reporters whispered. The walls, once bearing the weight of my silence, now just held echoes. I didn't stay because I wanted to be seen. I stayed because for the first time in my life, I wasn't erased. Chapter 9. 4403. 3 weeks passed. The courthouse had long been emptied of voices and verdicts, but the echo of everything that happened there still lived in the lines of my face when I looked in the mirror. There were no reporters now, no flurry of paper being pushed across wood, no tight grip around my chest whenever my mother walked into a room. That part of my life, for the first time, felt like it had an ending. The morning I returned to the center, the sky hung in a soft gray. It wasn't gloomy, it was quiet, the kind of sky that lets you breathe. I stood at the threshold of the Women's Education Center, key in hand. The front door had been painted a muted teal, just as I asked. I didn't bring scissors for a ribbon. I didn't invite press or family or even Langston. I wanted this moment to be mine. Unperformed. The new brass nameplate by the entrance gleamed faintly in the morning light. Founded by Marais Aden, C. I traced the engraving with one finger, then pushed the door open. The scent of fresh paint and lemon oil drifted out to meet me. The walls inside were lined with empty corkboards and newly stacked shelves. One board in the front hallway had been left bare on purpose, a space for future announcements, new names, new stories. I walked the hallway slowly, fingertips grazing walls that once held erasure. Now they held intention. This time, I whispered to no one gets to write me out of it. Later that week, Langston stopped by. I wasn't expecting him, but I didn't turn him away. He didn't carry flowers. No apology on his lips. Just his presence, steady like always, with his hands buried deep in his coat pockets. He stood beside me as I rearranged stacks of donated art supplies. "You want me to stay?" he asked gently. I looked at him. Really looked. He hadn't flinched during the worst of it, had carried evidence on his back like armor. But now, he was just a man who had stood beside a woman learning to stand alone. I shook my head. "No, I need to finish this chapter on my own." He nodded, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder for a brief moment. Then he left, quietly. That was the thing about Langston. His silence had never been absence. It was respect, and I'd learned to tell the difference. A few days later, I received the final deed transfer. The property that once held the foundation's offices, the house where my name had been erased from the walls, now legally belonged to me. The envelope was thin, efficient. No ceremonial ribbon, just a signature and a stamp. Tucked inside was a USB drive. Langston had flagged it weeks ago, but only now did I open it. I plugged it into my laptop at the kitchen table. The audio file clicked to life with a soft crackle. Then Celeste's voice, tired and unguarded, filled the air. "I never thought she'd go through with it. But fine, let her have the name. I already took what mattered." Her voice was sharp, not angry, resigned. The message, I later learned, had been left on Darla's voicemail. Accidentally recorded, accidentally saved. It floated across message boards for a few days, passed around by those who once praised her devotion, but I never shared it. I never commented. Some truths don't need amplification. They just need oxygen. Back at the center, on a quiet Tuesday, a girl no older than 8 handed me a folded piece of red paper. "It's a crane," she said, her voice soft. I make them when I feel safe. I smiled and took it gently. Did you fold this all by yourself? She nodded, cheeks rising. It's not perfect, but I didn't mess it up this time. I crouched to her eye level. Neither did I. Later, in my office, which still smelled like fresh plaster and lavender oil, I placed the red crane next to a blank journal I'd been meaning to write in. Not to retell what happened. That story had been told. No, the next chapter was for what came after. I traced the edge of the paper wings and whispered, "This story is done, but I'm not." I hadn't reconciled with Celeste. No apology came, no redemption arc, just silence. But I no longer waited for her to hand me the ending. I had my name, my place, my voice. The justice I wanted didn't come with a sentence. It came with space. Space to breathe, to reclaim, to build. The paper crane sat quietly on my desk, not perfect, but folded by choice. And this time, entirely in my hands. Before I go, let me say this. Not every story ends with applause. Sometimes healing comes quietly. It arrives in the form of a signed deed, a child's drawing, or simply a breath you can finally take without bracing for what comes next. For years, I thought surviving meant staying silent. I thought peace meant making myself smaller so others could feel bigger. But I've learned, your voice is not a burden, it's a boundary. And the moment you stop needing permission to matter, everything begins to change. If you're out there right now carrying wounds in secret, let me tell you this. You are not invisible. You are not crazy. And you are not alone. Whatever has tried to erase you, history, family, failure, you still get to write the next page. So now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself from the ashes of someone else's choices? Do you believe forgiveness is necessary for closure? Or can healing happen without it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I truly read them all. And if this story touched your heart or made you think differently about power, forgiveness, or family, leave a 1 in the comments so I know you're with me. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who you are. And if this video didn't speak to you, tell me why. Your voice matters too. If you'd like to hear more real, raw stories like this one, about resilience, justice, and reclaiming your name, make sure to subscribe to the channel.